Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain of this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, this 2016 presidential election cycle has shown the bizarre side of the American system of polity. After all, it is also the election cycle in which the salivating mainstream media likes to remind us is the one in which we're supposed to discard with conventional wisdom. This proved to be a self-fulfilling prophecy in that now, the New York billionaire, businessman, real estate tycoon, and all-around vulgarian, Donald J. Trump, also known as John Barron, also known as John Miller, has become the presumptive nominee for the gutless opposition party, or GOP. Of course, this is going to have far-reaching ramifications for the Republican Party, particularly with respect to this general election. The reason I say that is Donald Trump has some of the highest negatives that have ever been recorded since the polling institutes have started recording such data. And anyone who's ever held negatives even remotely approaching those of Donald Trump has fallen to defeat in the general election. Of course, the counter to this is that Hillary Clinton also carries high negatives. But the problem with that argument is that it disregards the fact that Donald Trump's negatives are actually higher than the former First Lady and Secretary of State. Not to mention that Donald J. Trump suffers from the same type of flip-flopping syndrome that John Kerry did during the 2004 presidential election cycle. That ultimately pushed him to defeat, and I have a feeling it will do the same to the New York vulgarian. Nevertheless, we, the American people, find ourselves in an untenable situation, facing, as I stated on yesterday's Solo Flight Special Edition, a truly disgusting and nightmarish scenario, that of having to choose between two pathological and narcissistic liars. Of course, remember what I said in another past episode of Radio Aviation Excellence the Wright Flyer, that the power of political perception often matters more than reality in the arena of American politics. And that is certainly what this entire false narrative of a choice between two lesser evils is coming down to. It is a false narrative. It is a false perception. It is fear-mongering at its worst. And the reason that it comes down to fear-mongering is the powers that be want to control it. They want to dominate the narrative, and they wish to have the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media determine who our candidate is for us. Of course, the only ones who can reject that are the same ones who are the only ones who are endowed with the authority and power to truly save this country. You see, folks, it comes in the first lines, the opening lines of the preamble to our shared United States Constitution. We the people, we are the only ones, by the very design of this once flourishing representative republic of ours, endowed with the power to save this country. Because if you keep in mind that one person could save the country, that same person would be endowed with enough power and authority to strip this nation apart at the seams. And that's the problem that we're facing. The reason that the stakes feel so high in this 2016 election cycle is due to the nature of the highest executive office. Under the disastrous 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime, we have seen the executive be transformed into something it was never constitutionally endowed to be. That is, using his telephone and his pen to subvert the clear and concise language contained within the 4 corners of the United States Constitution, Barack Hussein Obama has transformed the executive office into one that executes the law, into one in which we see that the chief executive attempts to become a secondary legislature. That is diametrically opposed to the separation of powers, which is a safety valve that was included in the Constitution. You know, the infinite wisdom of our founding fathers clearly demonstrates that they were warning us and attempting to prevent the very sort of nightmare scenario that unfurls before our very eyes in this 2016 election cycle. They never dreamed that politicians would come to wield so much power, and make no mistake about it, ladies and gentlemen, Donald J. Trump is a politician. You see, again, the perception is woven that he is not. And we now find ourselves between a rock and a proverbial hard place with respect to preserving this representative republic of ours. But we need to take heed in the fact, and solace in the fact, that we are still the ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this great representative republic. It will always be that way, because our system of polity here in the United States is based off of the natural law tenets that underpin our Constitution. The Constitution itself is a sacred contract made between the government and the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. You can find evidence of this in the opening lines to the preamble to the United States Constitution. And as soon as we remember this, and remember the amount of power, and just to the great extent at which it belongs to us, we can stand up to these nefarious forces who are attempting to fundamentally transform our nation and say no. No, you can no longer destroy our country. No, you can no longer have carte blanche with your power. So, what does it mean? Well, it means that the lines are now being drawn. The forces of anti-constitutionalism are now facing up against the true, pure constitutionalists. We must fight for the soul of this nation. And in order to do that, we must fight for the soul of the American people as well. We must find a path back to restoring virtue in the United States of America. Now that's much easier said than done. I have no delusions of grandeur with respect to how difficult this task will be. Nevertheless, we here in the United States of America have never once turned away from a challenge. We have never once been defeated by adversity that arises in our path, and we have never been one to back down from any challenge. So, we must take heart in that, and we must take on our duties, our obligations, and above all our responsibilities in stoic fashion. We must never give up the fight, and that is why we never will. Of course, the first step will be to tell Donald Trump that we reject his type of authoritarian vulgarianism and his attempted hostile takeover of the conservative movement. He will not be able to redefine it. Of course, what it really comes down to is the type of dangerous and dark and twisted semantics that we have warned you about since our first episode. You see, all Fabian socialists like to engage in these games of semantics, to obfuscate the truth and to pull the political wool over the eyes of the ultimate wielders of political sovereignty and popular sovereignty. They want to redefine everything that we hold near and dear in this once thriving representative republic of ours in the hopes that they can ultimately destroy it and replace it with a Fabian socialist dystopia. Again, the onus falls upon we, the people, to stand up to this, to reject it wholeheartedly and outright. Of course, that is no easy task. But we must have faith in our ability to do so. We must believe that we can do so, otherwise defeat becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, if you are of the mindset that a Hillary Clinton presidency would spell the end of this representative republic once and for all, I ask that you actually take a step back and reconsider. Because, no matter what, this country is not dead as long as we, as popular sovereigns, are willing to come together in solidarity and unity and resist and shove off or cast off the chains and shackles of governmental tyranny, bondage, servitude, and tell the government no. We have that power. It rests within our hearts, souls, and minds. It is time to awaken the true American spirit, to remind ourselves that we are the ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this republic. And you see, that's the other part. We have got to end this sort of loose, willy-nilly type of redefining the United States of America as a democracy. That is one of the greatest misnomers that has ever been forced upon the popular sovereigns. We have bought into it. We use it so loosely that we forget the fact that we are a representative republic. I know it may seem like I'm splitting hairs here, folks, but it is of the utmost importance that we understand who we are, that we understand what it is that we stand for. because semantics is designed to weaken an existing system. It's designed to make people unsure of what conventional definitions are, or, worse still, to reject those traditional definitions outright. That is what these Fabian socialists have been working towards. Evidence of this can be seen from the Barack Hussein Obama Department of Justice under now Loretta Lynch and formerly under Eric Holder, trying to now say that they will no longer refer to felons as felons. You see, this is all a part of a move to erase the strict structure of the American criminal justice system, to replace it with the idea that there are no criminals, that they are all just misunderstood. It's all part of the entitlement mentality that is running rampant from coast to coast and border to border. But we must reject this because people must be held accountable for their actions. You see, that's what it comes down to. The ultimate goal of the Fabian socialists is to erase this ideology or this notion that people must be held accountable. Because if you attack that, you attack the heart of what it means to be an American citizen, to accept responsibility for one's actions, to be held accountable for the decisions we make. In other words, they don't want people to be proactive. They don't want them to be independent in thought and nature and spirit. Otherwise, they can do and realize what it is that we all should realize. That we are the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, and that we have the power to stand up to, resist, and ultimately halt the government in its nefarious attempts to whitewash and ultimately erase this great representative Republican form of government that belongs to us. That is the truth. That is what we must ultimately band together around. You see, the only thing that truly unifies the American people, the greatest unifying factor in our relatively brief yet illustrious history, is the Constitution itself. It is the contractual document that binds us together. It allows us to have what is supposed to be a symbiotic relationship with respect to the government and we, the true wielders of sovereignty. However, the government for far too long now has been engaging in a campaign against the ultimate wielders of sovereignty, attempting to redefine that relationship, and they have blatantly breached that contract. Being in breach of contract, it means that we, the American people, can band together and demand a redress for our grievances. Unfortunately, far too many have been swayed by the machinations of a strongman who has convinced them that he is the only one that holds the ticket to salvation for the nation. But that cannot be the case, because if we allow someone to be all-powerful with respect to saving this nation, we also allow him to have the keys to destroy the nation. That is the epitome of everything that our founding fathers were so drastically opposed to. It goes against the very grain and fiber of the American character, heritage, spirit, and identity. But that's the goal. He wants you to think, he being Donald Trump, of course, that he is a savior, that he understands what is necessary to bring this nation back from the brink of ruin. However, he has led so many companies to ruin. He is a marketer. He is a carnival barker who has no interest for the United States of America. His interest has always been self-interest. That is what his past conduct shows. That is what his current flip-flopping shows. And that is why he is a terrible candidate to be the presumptive nominee for the gutless opposition party. Though we have been dealt this card, it does not mean that we must accept it. It does not mean that we must cast our vote for him. That does not mean also that we accept Hillary Clinton. In our eyes, both of these candidates are equally unacceptable. There is no lesser of two evils, and we can no longer stand idly by allowing this once thriving, fluent, and resplendent representative republic of ours to spin out of control towards its death. Perched upon the precarious cliff as it is, we must fight tooth and nail to revitalize the true spirit of American exceptionalism. In order to accomplish this, we must accept our duty, our role, and our obligation, which couches with each and every one of the fundamental and inalienable rights that have been endowed to us by our Creator. I understand that this seems like an extremely daunting task. It seems like something that we could never fully ratify or understand. But it is something we can do. It is something we can work towards, and we can do that at a step at a time. It is time to brush aside these erroneous notions that we can fulfill ourselves with instant gratification. This is going to be a long and drawn-out fight, and we have to be prepared to carry on for the long haul. Again, that is not some easy task. I fully understand this. I know that it is a frightening proposition to face, but we are the ultimate wielders of sovereignty of the United States, and we must do our due diligence to ensure that this representative republic remains viable for posterity. That's what we forget. We forget the unending and uninterrupted lineage of the United States of America. We are the beneficiaries of the greatest birthright and inheritance of any people on the face of the earth, and that means that we must safeguard it. You see, the Constitution does protect our fundamental and inalienable rights, but in order for that to work, there must be this give and take quid pro quo relationship between the people and the document, because the document is a contract. That means that we, as a party to the contract, must ensure that the other party, namely the government, does not breach it. Yet, we have seen for far too long now that the federal government has been in direct breach, in blatant, open, and obvious breach of this sacred contract. Therefore, it is time for us to shoulder our responsibility, carry out our duties, and take the country back from those nefarious forces that would attempt to fundamentally transform the United States. And of course, what does that mean? It means that we must take it back not only from Democrats who have been taken over in totality by the nefarious Fabian socialists, but also from the attempted coup of the conservative movement. Semantics is such a dangerous game because it attempts to redefine things, because it attempts to muddy the lines and blur boundaries. That's what Donald J. Trump is trying to do. It's why he came out and said that the Republican Party should redefine its abortion plank and platform. That's an unacceptable condition, because if we are to redefine who we are, it needs to be based on liberty, and it must be based on the fundamental tenets contained within the four corners of the United States Constitution. But Donald Trump is not interested in the Constitution. Donald Trump is interested in becoming an imperial president. Haven't we suffered enough of that under the 2 disastrous terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime? Haven't we seen enough of the mayhem unleashed by this catastrophic presidency, transforming a representative republic into nothing short of a banana republic? That would be a mere continuation of it to put our weight behind Donald Trump. And anyone who would support Donald Trump is actually missing the true narrative. The real narrative that has been obfuscated and hidden from the light of truth for far too long now, for at least a century. That truth is this: you are either for the Constitution and the natural law tenets that underpin it, or you are against it. Donald J. Trump has proven by his own words, deeds, and actions, time and again, that he is diametrically opposed to the clear and concise language contained within the Constitution. Therefore, if you support Donald Trump, you cannot claim to be a constitutional conservative. I know it may be hard to hear that, but I want you to seriously consider the ramifications of your action if you choose to support him. You see, the fear-mongering that has been pushed forth by the détente wing of the gutless opposition party is designed to keep you continuing to vote for the status quo, irrespective of the fact that it is pushing this nation irreversibly to the left each and every time. Except, it's not just irreversible, it's not truly irreversible, because if we come together in the spirit of our founding fathers, with the understanding that we are the ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we can regain this representative republic, we can restore government to sanity, but it's going to be a much harder fight due to the bizarre ascendancy of the New York vulgarian. I don't want you to become despondent. I don't want you to become despaired. This is actually a breath of fresh air for us, because it gives us an opportunity to see who are the charlatans, who are the frauds, so that we can oppose them. You see, there were many who claimed to be rank-and-file members of the conservative movement who were just charlatans, shills, and hucksters. Nowhere is this seen more than in the ranks of the so-called conservative media and punditry. People like Matt Drudge, Sean Hannity, Michael Savage, Laura Ingraham, just to name a few, have betrayed their principles, have betrayed their ideology. Therefore, they are not to be trusted. They should not be welcomed into the wings of the rebirth of the conservative movement. It is time for us to rise into the air, ascending like a phoenix from the ashes of this wanton destruction that has been unleashed upon us by these proverbial political vandals. We must stand together, now more than ever, to ensure that the vitality of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours continues. That duty, that obligation, and above all that responsibility is ours and ours alone. We must come together. We must be the new resistance, as I've said on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, The Wright Flyer. But how do we do that? How do we come about this? We come about it by not only pointing out the truth, but by spreading knowledge of our Constitution and of our fundamental and inalienable rights. We do this by re-establishing the true scope, spirit, and letter of the supreme law of the land, which, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2 of the Constitution, is none other than the Constitution itself. Again, I know this is easier said than done. Nevertheless, it is a task that we must not back away from. It is a task that we must accept wholly as our own, and we must march forward with diligence. Keep your head up high, America, because we are just at the beginning. This is just the start of the fight. The media, led by the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the elevating mainstream media, want you to believe that this is the end. They couldn't be more mistaken than they are. This is just the beginning. We are just rising, and for those who bought into a false sense of anger, allow them to reap the righteous indignation that will sweep across our beloved nation like a whirlwind of cleansing flame. That is the reality that we face. We must be the one to construct the narrative. We must be the one that demands the future. This is why Texas Senator Ted Cruz, after closing his candidacy for the highest office in the land, called for us to continue to fight for our conservative ideals, to ensure that the battle for liberty is not ceded to the forces of tyranny and despotism. Because, as I said, what we are facing now is the true battle, the battle for the soul of this nation. And that battle is for the continued viability of the Constitution. You see, all of the problems that we are facing in the United States of America right now arise out of this unwillingness to return to strict adherence to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of the United States Constitution. That is the battle that we are facing. A weak economy is caused by the government operating outside of the proper scope and application and boundaries of government as mandated by the Constitution. Unless and until we realize that, and unless and until we stand up for that, we are going to continue to see these things spin out of control. We are going to continue to see the accelerating death spiral of this once flourishing representative republic continue unabated and worsen. This is why with each successive election cycle, we've seen the candidates, for the most part, become worse and worse. We have seen a rejection of the true principled candidates as people grow more desperate looking for a savior. This is the one false narrative that is the most destructive of them all. We have got to completely discard with this notion that one person can save the country. We must do away with that forever, because it is impeding our ability to actually save the nation. It is impeding our ability to cope with reality and take the steps that are necessary. So you see, again, America, it falls upon our shoulders. We are the ones that must make the ultimate decisions and, if necessary, the ultimate sacrifices. I know that, too, is a frightening prospect to face, particularly when you see how overzealous and just how out of control and outlandish this government has become. You see, that is the transformation that has worked against us from the beginning. But don't let the bizarre aspect and nature of this political cycle and of this election cycle tear you down. Don't let it make you think that this is the end, because it ultimately comes down to you. You ultimately carry the power. This is the uplifting and empowering message that we have wished to share with you and have been attempting to share with you since we first went onto the air back on September 11th of 2015. We, as the American people, must band together. We must see that there is a greater good. We must come to the realization that this representative republic's survival depends upon our willingness to destroy the chains and shackles of governmental tyranny, bondage, and servitude, which attempts to impede our progress towards liberty. You see, again, the damaging semantics that the progressive movement has foisted upon us continues to unleash monstrous and nightmarish apparitions towards us. These apparitions are trying to convince us to simply lay down our arms and cease the fight. Well, that is not who we are. They are underestimating us, as every enemy who has ever come to doubt the prowess of our free people and of our representative Republican form of government has done in the past. We will overcome them because of our spirit, because of our ideology, because of the blood that flows within our vein. Never forget that it is the blood of patriots that flows through our veins, that we are the beneficiaries of this great, free, and noble nation. And that means that we must never, ever capitulate or collaborate with the forces of tyranny and destruction. Yes, there will be strange bedfellows in this time. For instance, El Jefe Jebe Jefe Bush has stated that he will not vote for Donald J. Trump. There's not a lot that I agree with El Jefe on, but I will accept the notion of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, at least for so long as I can use it to benefit the Constitution. That is the type of mentality we must accept as we march together, shoulder to shoulder, never to stop, never to back down, never to abandon our principles. You see, that is what it's going to come down to. We must have a virtuous republic, and a virtuous republic requires a knowledgeable and principled electorate. This is the time that we must renew our vows to the United States Constitution, that we must swear allegiance to the Constitution and to the Constitution alone. That is what it comes down to. The Constitution is inspired by God's law, and therefore it requires that each and every one of us stand in solidarity and unity in support with it, and that support must be complete and unwavering. You see, that is why we say you are either with the Constitution or you are against the Constitution. That means, irrespective of what political party any candidate vying for the reins of political power belongs to, if they stand in any way, shape, or form outside of the Constitution or seek to harm the Constitution, then they are not qualified to wield the reins of political power in this representative republic of ours. That is a truth. An undeniable truth, and we must embrace it. We must make it a creed and a part of our national identity and mission. If conservatism is to remain a viable option, if we are to hang on to our traditions and institutions, we must be dedicated to this proposition. We must be vigilant, and we must be courageous in our stance. That is what our founding fathers would expect of us, and that is what the up-and-coming generations, and indeed those which have yet to be born, demand of us as well. Again, I understand that this is not an easy path, that it is not a light path to walk, and that there will be times of fear and anguish. But the rewards far outweigh the risk, and we are an unshakable force. We are the United States of America. We love our nation, we love our people, and we love everything of which it represents and stands for. Therefore, we must come together. And we must make this valiant stance. That is the only way that this country will ever return to prosperity, and the vitality of our rights and freedoms can continue for generations yet to come. Therefore, I ask that you join us in saying that you will never turn your back on the Constitution, that you will never turn your back on liberty, and that we will resist the forces that would attempt to do so with every fiber of our existence. That is our pledge. We ask that you make that pledge with us to the Constitution, because that is the only thing to which Americans can swear allegiance to. It's time to renew our vows to the Constitution, to the contract that defines us and protects us. That is our stance and our mission. Folks, I want to turn to another bizarre aspect with respect to this 2016 presidential election cycle, one that should be concerning for each and every one of us. Donald J. Trump has come forth and stated that he's found a way to really deal with America's national debt, and that is to tell the foreign creditors, or indeed any creditors, that they cannot expect to have any type of full payment, irrespective of what the contracts state. You see, again, this goes to the whole notion that the United States of America is not a business, that a national debt must be paid back in full in order for our creditors to keep faith in the American people. Otherwise, it is going to come down to requiring higher taxes on the ultimate wielders of sovereignty. But the problem is that the standard of living in the United States of America today has not kept up with inflation. Donald Trump thinks that he can basically have the United States declare bankruptcy, but that goes against the notions of our federal bankruptcy law. It goes against everything that is stabilizing with respect to a nation. This sort of dangerous, reckless line of thought by Donald Trump is going to be detrimental for the United States of America as a whole, and it will only make the situation worse. But again, he's not thinking of it that way, and he's not approaching it as a nation, he's approaching it as a business. Again, this speaks to the self-aggrandizement that has been the centerpiece of his entire adult life. And there has been nothing by his statements or actions that shows that he's going to act any differently, or that he has suddenly had a change of heart and become a magnanimous soul. To basically cheat our creditors is to ensure that our credit rating will continue to implode under a Trump presidency, just as it has under the disastrous 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime. I'm sorry, there's no other way to really state this, folks. There's no way to sugarcoat that or to sweep that under the rug. That is just the facts, and we are dealing with the facts. So what Trump is trying to suggest here is in the lines of what Lázaro Cárdenas did in Mexico. And we saw what happened with that back in the 20th century, when he attempted to just basically revalue the Mexican peso. It made hyperinflation become a reality, and it drove the standard of living down in that country. We will see the same type of thing happen here, and that is why it is a dangerous thought to go to a trade war with our trading partners and devalue and debase our currency more than we already are. Of course, it's interesting because one of the things that Donald J. Trump complained about all throughout the primary season was that China was debasing and devaluing their currency. Of course, it goes to show that the New York businessman, real estate tycoon, and billionaire has not considered this. It shows that he speaks out of both sides of his mouth. That is also a dangerous proposition for the man who is supposed to represent all of the United States of America. And since he said that everything is negotiable, it means that he will try to negotiate our fundamental and inalienable rights. He will try to negotiate our national existence. And believe me, folks, those who thought that he wasn't a globalist are gravely mistaken. All you have to do is pick up one of his Make America Great Again Give Me caps and see that it's made in China. And all you have to do is see that in his stump speeches in the state of New Jersey that he's giving with New Jersey Governor Krispy Kreme Hamburger Christie, that he's charging $200+ for admittance to those events in order to pay down the debt of Christie's campaign. You see, it's all a farce. It's all a fraud. He's using our money to fix the failed hopes and dreams of candidates. So that promise that he was going to be self-funding, you can discard with that because he has discarded with it. You can see that he never meant it. He never actually wanted to commit to what he said that he was. It shows that he is not who he claims to be. Of course, this is something we've been warning you about for at least 10 months now here on Radio Aviation Excellence, The Wright Flyer. It is something that we all must take seriously, and now that he is the presumptive nominee of the Gutless Opposition Party, or GOP, it spells doom and disaster come for the general election in November. Hillary Clinton will be able to play this because the Democrats are masters of the whole false and erroneous narrative of class warfare. That is what they believe in. That is their most diligent, heartfelt beliefs. That is why she had to really fight hard to battle off self-avowed Democratic socialist Vermont Senator Noidface Boing Me Sanders. And while she hasn't fully grasped the nomination yet, just as the New York Vulgarian has not fully grasped the Republican nomination yet, it is looking more and more likely that she will be the nominee for the Democrat Party. She has the lead in superdelegates. She has been very meticulous and patient in waiting for her opportunity to sink her claws into the body politic of the United States of America. Nevertheless, we see through the charade, we see through the fraud, and we must show once again that the only thing that we swear allegiance to is our shared Constitution. That is what it's called for on each and every one of us in our role and in our capacity as popular sovereigns of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic. Again, I understand that this is not an easy position for us to assume, yet it is the only viable one that will ensure that our liberties are protected. For those who are really concerned about the selection of a Supreme Court nominee, it also demonstrates that we have to battle with this false notion that the Supreme Court has become the most powerful branch of government. The judiciary was never meant to be the most powerful branch of government. In fact, the most powerful branch of government, if you look at the clear and concise language of the Constitution, particularly with respect to Article 1, is none other than the people's branch of government, which is the legislature. That is, Congress and the Senate, the House of Representatives and the Senate. We have to really revitalize our movement within the grassroots. We have to set down a manifesto which is based on the Constitution. This means that we must rededicate ourselves to the Constitution and to disavow anyone who would go against the clear, concise, and open and obvious language of the Constitution. You see, we don't have to reinvent the will, folks. We do not have to reinvent it. The reason we do not have to is because we have the key. The key has been with us since the inception of our great nation over 230 years ago. That key is none other than the Constitution itself. This is the message that we have been providing to you all the time since last September. It is a message that we are still just as devotedly dedicated to as we were when we first started speaking into our microphones, providing you with this great information. Now, again, we don't want you to take what we're saying at face value. We want you to look into it yourselves, to vet the things for yourself and to discover the truth for yourself, because in so doing, you empower yourselves to see through the fakes, the frauds, the charlatans, the con artists, and the snake oil salesmen that want to dupe and deceive you. Of course, the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media don't want you to consider this. They don't want you to analyze this in the fashion that we are analyzing it right here and right now, just as we have analyzed it on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, The Wright Flyer. But this is the type of analysis that is necessary to ensure that the United States of America remains a viable, independent, and free country. You see, your rights and your liberties matter most. Without those, we have nothing. Without those, we are reduced to a position of servitude and bondage to the government. That is something that we must reject wholeheartedly as American citizens, because it goes against our grain and fiber and the inheritance that has been handed to us so that posterity may continue to enjoy the exercising of their fundamental and inalienable rights. Indeed, we are supposed to expand upon the horizon so that the up-and-coming generations and those which have yet to be born may continue to fully exercise their rights and liberties without fear of the iron fist of governmental retribution. You see, that's what true freedom is. Indeed, that's what the real American dream is, and we must rededicate ourselves to it. If we fail to do so, then we have failed not only our ancestors, but also our progeny. So, where we go from here is to a position of respecting the sovereign rights of the individual, the popular sovereign. We stand up for limited scope and application of government as our founding fathers had always intended this representative republic to operate as, and within the scope of government as is outlined and mandated in the four corners of the Constitution. What's amazing to me, and what also reflects upon the bizarre characteristics and aspects of this 2016 election cycle, is just how the narrative of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media would attempt to paint us as fanatics and radical fundamentalists. You see, all we are attempting to do is enforce the laws that exist, to adhere to the supreme law of the land. Those who would go against that are the true radicals. Those who would deny this are the ones who are truly opposed to everything that we stand for and represent. But they don't want to paint the narrative in that fashion, because they have a propagandistic goal and agenda, and that is tearing this nation apart at the seams to replace our representative republic with a Fabian socialist dystopia. That would be a nightmare for the American people and for the nation at large. This is why the language of Donald Trump saying that we should simply screw our investors would be such a dangerous proposition. It is the type of tin-pot dictator edicts that have led many nations to ruination. But we cannot accept that, because our rights and our liberties and our standard of living and our quality of life are far too important to simply hand away on a gamble like this. At least with Hillary Clinton, we know that she can be resisted. We know where she stands. With Donald J. Trump, he is an unknown entity. He is consistently inconsistent, and that makes him dangerous. The unpredictable in politics is something that is unacceptable, because it steers the entire nation towards depravity and destruction. If we let that be our lot, then we are the orchestrators and the architects of the doom of what is the greatest, longest-lasting, most open and honest form of government that humanity has ever seen. I am not willing to allow this to occur, just as I am sure that you, our cherished listening passengers and audience, are not allowed or are not going to allow that to occur. That is repugnant to you, that it turns your stomach and makes you grimace with fear. Well, embrace the emotions you're feeling right now and temper it with logic, and show these charlatans, these frauds, these political powers that be that currently wield the reins of political power in this once thriving representative republic of ours, that they are not the masters of our destiny, that we have not abandoned the natural law tenets that underpin this great nation of ours. I know that this is a difficult position to assume, and yes, it would seem that we are being unrealistic, but we are actually being realistic. What Donald J. Trump is trying to do is negotiate with those who have nothing more than the destruction of our nation in their hearts. Now he says that he can be a good negotiator. How is he going to negotiate himself out of binding contracts? How is he going to ignore the status quo that has been in place and served this nation so well for generations now? You see, that's the sort of change for the sake of change that is dangerous. That's what we distrust with respect to the Fabian socialists on the left. They're seeking to radically, drastically, and fundamentally transform the United States. And he is trying to show that the United States, much like himself, under his leadership, would be a nation that did not keep its vows and its words. Remember when I said in the last segment that the United States of America must be a virtuous republic? What that means is that we must be a people of our word. We must be people of honor, because our liberty requires that we be trustworthy. It is through our vow and the bond of our vow that we continue to be a light of hope for liberty in this world. We are the last best hope for liberty in this world, and we must not let go of that. It means that we must fight tooth and nail to preserve all that we hold near and dear. For should we fail to do so, then we are allowing this great representative republic to fall not only into disrepair, but also to approach ruin. Perhaps that has been the goal all along of Donald J. Trump. Perhaps that is why his sharpest arrows in his quiver have been aimed at his fellow Republicans rather than the true enemy that faces us, rather than the true opponent that wants to destroy this country. The fact that so many in the so-called conservative punditry and commensurate refuse to acknowledge this shows that they were never really committed to it to begin with. It is time that we come together and band around the truth. You see, the truth is the greatest victim of this election cycle. It is the greatest bizarre aspect of this election cycle, because with Donald J. Trump, we see that it has become the post-truth campaign. Well, honesty is not something that I'm willing to give up on. And honesty should be something that the American people, as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in America, should not be willing to discard either. We must remind those in power and that those who seek power that we are boss, that we are the leaders. You see, that is the difference between a business and the United States. We shouldn't just throw away our principles and our time-honored values, traditions, and institutions as a nation to look towards a charlatan who is used to running his own business as his personal empire to redefine who we are and what we are as a nation and a people. To do so would be to abandon everything that we hold near and dear. It goes against all that we hold of value. And that would be betraying our national character, heritage, spirit, and identity. Again, the reason that we see the type of moral decay that is afflicting the United States like a plague is because of our abandonment of our principles, because we no longer teach what it is to be right and wrong, and to realize that moral relativism is a cancer that walks in tandem with the cancerous doctrine of political correctness that is threatening to destroy our vitality as a nation. We must band together in the spirit of harmony, solidarity, and unity, and reject these forces that would cause us to become a deceitful people. It is against our nature and against our identity to turn our back on our solemn vows. Again, this is what is so dangerous about Donald Trump. The bizarre requirement that he made in several of the primary and caucus sites where he had people take an oath of loyalty to him as an individual. That's the sort of things that one expects from a tin-pot dictator. That's the sort of loyalty that Adolf Hitler demanded from the Nazi Party as he was rising to ascendancy in 1930s Germany. We cannot accept that. That is wholly and diametrically opposed to who we are and what we represent. We as a nation and a people are good by our nature. We are driven by the natural law that is engraved upon each of our hearts as popular sovereigns. But we must embrace that. We must not be afraid to stand up to these forces that seek to destroy us, that seek to redefine us in ways that we do not wish to be redefined. I know, again, just how frightening this can be. I know how disheartening it can be to have the false narrative which has been peddled by the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, to have it seem as though conservatism and actual constitutionalism has been rejected outright. But that's not the case. It is not true. Because what we see here is that the salivating mainstream media has gone out of its way to once again pick our nominee for us. Well, the way that we combat that, the way that we get around that, is to educate ourselves, is to empower ourselves with the knowledge of our Constitution and with reasserting our fundamental and inalienable rights. Again, I know that this is not an easy task, but it is the task that has been dealt to us, and we must make the best of a dangerous and bad situation. See this as an opportunity, not of destruction, but of rebirth. See this as the opportunity to stake our claim for this great republic of ours, to remain as staunch adherents to everything that we value in this country. That is what we must view this as. In fact, what it really is a breath of fresh air for the United States. We can come together now and redefine the movement. It is a watershed moment like that of 1964, and we will redefine it. We will advance the cause of conservatism for generations to come. But we must be meticulous in our planning, and we must not expect instant gratification. That has been the mistake. We have allowed far too long now to negotiate our principles in the thoughts that the other side would negotiate theirs. You do not negotiate with those who are hell-bent on your destruction. You do not negotiate with terrorists or criminals. Of course, we see that under the disastrous 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime, that's what they were trying to do. Again, when Donald J. Trump says that everything is negotiable, that is a non-starter. It goes against our values. It stands staunchly opposed to what is necessary to ensure the vitality of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. That cannot be tolerated. We've allowed that to be tolerated for far too long now, with the idea that if we gave them a little bit, they would just leave us alone. These people are not the type that give up. They are radicals. They are the true fundamentalists who are waging a politically correct jihad against our values, our traditions, and our institutions. And if we think that that's going to be maintained just through the selection of a Supreme Court justice, we're forgetting that what we really need to battle for is a restoration of the proper tenets of federalism, that symbiotic relationship that is supposed to exist between the federal government and the several states. In order to preserve that, we must be in control at all levels of government. We must build a solid foundation based on our Constitution and work upwards. Then, from an unshakable, unwavering, and unmoving platform, we will be able to topple those forces of tyranny, despotism, and oppression. We will be able to reject them soundly time and again. This is what the Fabian socialists realized a long time ago. Remember that they named themselves after the Roman general Fabius, who ultimately defeated the Carthaginian general Hannibal, who had wrought havoc against Rome. He understood that drawing them further and further away from friendly supply lines greatly exposed them to a flanking attack, and once they were drawn out by little skirmish, followed by little skirmish, they would ultimately be led to defeat. That is what the Fabian socialists are about. It is all about incrementalization, incrementally marching towards their Fabian socialist dystopia, redefining who we are as a nation and as a people, and to take away our traditional values and prerogatives. Well, we must be just as driven, just as motivated to move on a meticulous, well-thought-out, century-long plan. We cannot expect to see the fulfillment of our goal within our lifetime, but that's fine. All we have to do is continue to advance the Constitution. We must fight for it, and we must stand on our principles and values. And the first stance that we're called to make, particularly with respect to this 2016 presidential election cycle, is to reject any and all forces that stand in stark opposition to that goal.
You see, these forces are not about maintaining liberty. These forces are about trampling and toppling liberty, and therefore we must not negotiate with them. That means that the Never Trump movement must come together and state that never means never, that we gave our solemn vow, that we stand in solidarity and unity in stark opposition to a man who is proactively claiming that he wants to redefine the conservative movement, that he wants to reshape the Republican Party. If the Republican Party comes to reject us, then it will be the death knell of the Republican Party. A conservative coalition cannot exist without constitutionalists. That is the simple truth of the matter. And it's also important to remember that when they try and redefine us as a democracy, they're hoping to create the type of unstable parliamentary democracies that we see all throughout the world. Those are unstable. They are not part of our tradition. In fact, they are foreign and alien to us. We must embrace the system of government that was handed to us by our founding fathers. We must insist at all times that we return to strict adherence to the fundamental tenets that are contained within the four corners of the United States Constitution. That is the only way to ensure that we defend, protect, and maintain our rights and liberties, as well as a free, open, and honest system of government. Government, by its very nature, must be limited in scope and application. Unfortunately, that is not the position that Donald J. Trump holds. We've seen that in his past actions, such as abusing the Fifth Amendment's eminent domain in order to achieve for himself, to achieve private gain. That's never what the eminent domain takings clause was about. And it shows that he is willing to disregard the Constitution at each and every step. When you don't find value in the Constitution, you don't find value in the nation or in our time-honored traditions and institutions. Well, you see that, too, with Donald Trump, in the way that he has embraced the radical, frothing-at-the-mouth, Fabian socialist approach to the transgender restroom issue. But you see the power that we wield when we reject it. Look at what has happened to the Target stores that have come out and stated that we should simply get over it. We shouldn't care about the health, safety, and well-being of our children, our progeny. Well, in Frisco, Texas, last week, there was a man who stepped into a dressing room, which all dressing rooms at Target stores are now gender neutral, and attempted to film her. So already we see that their march towards embracing this cancerous doctrine of political correctness is resulting in criminality. That is the last thing that we should allow to ever become the hallmark of who we are as a nation and as a people. Criminality is not who we are. We are a nation of laws, not of men. And it is time that we remind those who wield the reins of political power that that is who we are, that it is to apply to us all equally, and that we should never allow a tyranny of the minority to dominate us, but at the same time we should never allow a tyranny of the majority to dominate us either. You see, that is the reason why we are a republic and not a democracy. And the reason we are not a democracy is that a democracy only recognizes the right of the majority. It would allow the majority to trample upon the fundamental and inalienable rights of the individual popular sovereign. The only way to have a working system is to recognize the rights of the popular sovereign. That is why the federal government must be one of limited power, and why we must exert greater control over the government of the several states. That is what the true tenets of federalism requires. That is what a federalist representative republic is built upon and based upon. We understand this, but Donald Trump does not. And therefore, Donald Trump is not qualified to wield the reins of political power in this country. The same is true for Hillary Clinton, but that has been known all along. Hillary Clinton has been a staunch opponent of everything that we stand for and represent for a very long time now, but so too has Donald Trump. Therefore, if we are to continue to accept this erroneous doctrine of voting for the lesser of two evils, it means that we are capitulating to the further unraveling of our sacred Constitution. That is not something we can do. That is a wholly untenable situation and an unacceptable one on top of that. Therefore, we, as popular sovereigns, must band together, must demand that we return to the proper scope and application of government as mandated by our Constitution. That means non-negotiable. That means we must be stalwarts. And if that is fundamentalist or radical or outlandish and unrealistic, fine. We embrace those labels because our founding fathers embraced them too. And if our founding fathers were unrealistic, then we know that they took on the most powerful, well-organized military force known to man at that time, the British Armed Forces, and won against all odds and against all adversity. We must be as hard-hearted as our founding fathers were. We must be as dedicated to the cause of independence and liberty as they were. We must never turn our back on our time-honored values, institutions, and traditions. This is what we are called upon to do as popular sovereigns. And I know that it will make people think that we are completely out of touch with reality, but they can go to hell, because they are the ones that have allowed this to come to fruition. Those who have pushed for Donald Trump's dominancy within the rank and file of the Republican Party are not valuing the Constitution. Remember, the election cycle may be bizarre, but the truth is, the narrative has become more clear than ever. Our position has become more clear than ever. And our position is this, that you are either with the Constitution or you stand in stark opposition to the Constitution. Neither Donald J. Trump nor Hillary Rotten Clinton stand for the Constitution. Therefore, we must oppose them with all of our might, with every fiber in our being and existence, because that is what our duty and obligation is as popular sovereigns of this once flourishing, thriving, representative republic of ours. We are dedicated to that here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, just as we are confident that our cherished listening passengers and audience members are dedicated to that as well. Iowa radio show host Steve Deese has recently come out with a piece. In fact, he came out with that piece today, in which he states the bizarre aspect of those who doubt the Never Trump movement. It's amazing that they attempt to define Never Trump as perhaps sometimes Trump, if Trump's going to stand for everything we believe in, or he's the lesser of two evils. No, it comes down to being a solemn vow and commitment of direct opposition to those who stand in stark opposition to our shared values and principles, which are contained within the four corners of the United States Constitution. You see, that too has been a bizarre aspect of this 2016 presidential election cycle. The narrative of the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media has been that we should reject the Constitution, and that it has been rejected, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. Donald J. Trump really has not amassed a majority vote. In fact, 58% of the Republican voters voted against Donald Trump. And last I checked, when you're going on a scale of 100%, 58% is a majority. Unfortunately, we see now that he is claimed as the presumptive nominee, that the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media has once again, most likely, selected our candidate for us. And what's so laughable about this is the fact that Donald J. Trump attempted to go off of the narrative that he didn't want the media selecting our candidates, and certainly his most vocal acolytes claimed that they were sick and tired of the media selecting the nominee for the Gutless Opposition Party, or GOP. Yet, nevertheless, here we are. We're facing the fact that the salivating mainstream media has indeed and in fact attempted to, and almost successfully, unless some miracle occurs, has done so. I'm not willing to give up hope and faith, though, and I'm certainly not willing to give up on our time-honored values, institutions, and traditions, which are embodied by the natural law tenets that underpin this once thriving representative republic of ours. It is something that we must reject, that the media can control and dominate the narrative. This is why the real betrayers, the real bizarre outcome with the Fox News Channel and other supposed right-leaning media sources must be held accountable for their betrayal of our strong and staunch principles. They are the ones that want to sell out for ratings. Recall that Bill O'Reilly of the Fox News Channel tried to say that the way in which Donald J. Trump was engaging his primary campaign sold ratings, and therefore he would get more coverage. But they gave him 3 times as much coverage as any other candidate vying for the Republican nomination. That is disgusting. That shows that they were not interested in any of it, and that they are derelict in their duty of why we even have a free press. If you recall that we have a free press, that our founding fathers ensured that that was part of the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights, or first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, to ensure that the press would be a watchdog against the thing that they inherently distrusted the most, an abusive, tyrannical, despotic central government. But the government can now rely upon the media to peddle a certain narrative, one that is pushing the Fabian socialist agenda, which is in stark opposition to the Constitution and is thereby violative of the supreme law of the land. Again, folks, these are the facts that we must awaken to. These are the facts that we must accept and then refute. The way that we refute it is by coming together and demanding a return to strict adherence at every level of government to the clear and concise language of the United States Constitution in tandem with the constitutions of the several states. Because that is the only way that we can protect our fundamental and inalienable rights which were endowed to us by our Creator. We must come to the same realization that George Mason did when he was called upon to help draft the Declaration of Rights for the state of Virginia. That was the entire catalyst that gave rise and birth to our Bill of Rights. You see, the great fight that it was occurring and the great battle that occurred during the Constitutional Convention and onwards was that the Constitution didn't do enough to protect the popular sovereignty of the individual. That was the major catalyst of the political fights that we have seen rage in this representative republic ever since. It's still the same fight that is raging right now. What is the proper scope, application, and role of the federal government, or indeed government at any level? It's this. It's that it is there to ensure that we have a steady environment in which to protect our own fundamental and inalienable rights, that we are still the ultimate wielders of sovereignty and the great arbiters of power. But that has been reversed. That has been flipped on its head, and Donald J. Trump is just as grievous in his outlook for government as Hillary Rodham Clinton. It's just that his pace towards forcing the United States into becoming a Fabian socialist dystopia might be a half step less than hers. Now, I've heard the argument be made that he must be supported because he is at least pro-life. The problem is he's waffled on every one of his positions. He has not once been consistent except in the grounds of being consistently inconsistent, at least in so much as this charade that he's put forth that he is some conservative. Donald J. Trump is no conservative. He does not adhere to our values and principles. He does not find value in the clear and concise language of our shared United States Constitution. And that is what Steve Deace was getting at in his recent piece here, because he was showing that the call towards the Never Trump movement is not just some political ideology or some political strategy. No, this is a statement of moral principle, purpose, and ideology. It is something that goes to the root of the future of this nation, to the vitality of our representative republic, and we must stand with it in stalwart fashion. But the problem is that at the same time that we're having to do this, we are also having to come to terms with the fact that the so-called friendly media, the so-called conservative commensurate, for the vast majority of them at least, have not been true to form. Look at Breitbart News. They have been the Pravda wing of the Trump campaign. Matt Drudge has become a propagandist for Trump. He's serving the role of Trump's Joseph Goebbels. That's unacceptable, because that is not the role of a free press. That is not what the press is supposed to be, unless they come out and state that it is opinion and that they are in bed with certain candidates. That's the way that the original pamphlets that were disseminated and distributed throughout the colonies were. That was the way that the free press worked in the 18th century. They were certainly more honest about who they were and what they stood for than the so-called conservative media that we're facing now. It's why I say that Matt Drudge is indicative of the William Randolph Hearst of the cyber age. He was the creator of a monopoly, but thankfully, as he has shown his true colors, as he continues to trash those who disagreed with him in some sort of crusade of personal vendettas, there have been those who have arisen to fill the gap. Sites such as thelibertydaily.com and sites like The Blaze and radio shows like that of Glenn Beck and Mark Levin. And The Blaze TV and Levin TV, these are all attempting to fill that gap. You see, this is the rise of the new resistance. This is what we mean when we say the new resistance. We are dedicated to liberty. We are movement conservatives. This is not about our ego. This is not about self-aggrandizement. We will stay true to the path that we promised to stay true to. That is why we made the vow that we did. It is why we stand shoulder to shoulder with you. And it is why we cannot abandon these principles that make up our heart and soul. You see, being dedicated to liberty and to the principles that underpin liberty is what allowed our founding fathers to overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. That is how our independence was won from the most powerful military force and organization known to man, the Crown of Britain. It was through their self-dedication and self-sacrifice, but above all, it was through their commitment to the principles come hell or high water. That is the same type of determination and commitment that we must show today. That is the only way that we can ensure that the vitality of our representative republic remains true. And we must never back away from it. Of course, that is no easy task. That is no soft option. And in fact, Steve Deese mentioned that that was the case as well. But at least we are now knowing who the true principled people are. You see, they formed a list of those who have signed the Never Trump pledge, at least those who are the most well-known public figures that are involved with it, because they want to know whether we're serious, or they want to know whether conservatism is dead just as the Republican Party is on its deathbed. Well, no, conservatism is not dead, and it will never be dead, because as long as there is at least one individual in this representative republic who seeks to stand up for and to adhere to the Constitution and spread knowledge about it, then we are not defeated. You see, we are dedicated to an ideology and a principle. That's why it's ridiculous to say that we were just in bed with the Cruz campaign. We supported Cruz as staunchly as we did because he stood up for the Constitution. You notice now that he has withdrawn, we continue the fight because even though we don't have a candidate supporting our point of view, that does not mean that we should not be ardently pushing for and fighting for our point of view. And therefore, that also means that we don't lend our support or our name to anyone who would stand in stark opposition to those principles and values that we hold near and dear. That is what our founding fathers did. That is how they were able to overcome all the adversity, irrespective of the fact that the movement for independence and liberty seemed to falter and was on the brink of collapse on more than one occasion. Look at the dedication that General George Washington had to the cause. Despite nearly losing every battle, he never lost hope. He never lost faith, and he never turned his back on the cause. Those who did turn their back on the cause were led to ruination and shame. Those were the Benedict Arnolds. Remember, Benedict Arnold was at one time a staunch patriot who stood up for everything that the Constitution would embody later on, but he betrayed the fight for liberty. He abandoned it for self-aggrandizement. That is what we see with these quislings that have abandoned conservatism. The Sean Hannitys, the Matt Drudges, the little orphan Annie Toto Yap 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 Coulters, they have abandoned this. The Laura Ingrams of this world would sit there and try and tell us that we are just whining or that we are complaining. And the most ardent and vocal acolytes of the Trump campaign would tell us that we are quote-unquote butthurt. That has nothing to do with it. We are not butthurt. We are not defeated. We are not dejected. We are not depressed. We are not demoralized, because we stand for the timeless principles of the natural law tenets that underpin this nation and our Constitution. We inherently understand that the United States of America is a nation of laws, not of men, meaning that the principles and ideology of the United States of America will outlive us all. That is what we must be dedicated to. That is our calling. And it is the calling of each and every one of us by our right as American citizens and by our role as American citizens. Remember that the American citizens are the ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this republic. That is the way it's designed. But it means that we will have to stand together in solidarity and unity against all the voices that attempt to heckle us, that attempt to demoralize us, that attempt to divide and conquer us. So all of those voices that are calling for a tyranny of false unity do not speak for us. They do not speak for you. They do not look out for your best interest, irrespective of whether the person who is making those shrill calls believes that to be the case or not. It's a type of bullying that we have seen become commonplace in our election cycles. It's what is attempting to force us to accept the unacceptable, but that is not who we are. That goes directly against our nature, and therefore we reject it outright. You see, that's what it calls for us to do. That is what it takes to be dedicated to liberty. We must reject all forces that would trample upon our fundamental and inalienable rights. And there can be no question that the New York billionaire, businessman, real estate tycoon, and all-around vulgarian Donald J. Trump would trample upon those rights. He's not dedicated to them because he sees no value in them. But we see that that is the only value worth having. And if that means that we suffer temporary setbacks or setbacks that would make us suffer for decades, then we accept those, just as our founding fathers did. This fight must be as long as it takes. And we must never abandon our principles, because if we abandon our principles, we are throwing the nation to the wolves. You see, like I said in the opening segment, where Barack Hussein Obama's Department of Justice is now refusing to call felons felons, it's this type of mentality that has started to poison the body politic of the United States of America into thinking that we shouldn't hold anyone accountable for their actions that is leading to this. This sort of depravity that is brought about by the disastrous notion of moral relativism, which is but a branch of the twisted tree of political correctness, is threatening to strangle the roots of the tree of liberty. Well, it is time that we come out with hatchets ready to chop down that tyrannical tree of political correctness, and that we remain true to our values and principles. You can be a charlatan so that you can be a vulgarian to claim that you are against political correctness, but look at the way that those who act in such a manner, those like Donald Trump, react. His claim that you should be able to use any restroom to whichever gender you identify with is perpetuating this type of disgusting, grotesque moral relativism. That is unacceptable. It goes against the natural law tenets. It goes against the constitutional application of government and the proper scope and application thereof. You see, again, when it comes down to every problem that is facing the United States of America, it is rooted in this departure and divorcement from the Constitution. If we are to remain as a viable, free people and nation, we must adhere to the Constitution, and we must demand that those who seek to wield the reins of political power in America strictly adhere to the clear and concise language contained within the Constitution, must strictly adhere to the natural law tenets that underpin it, and must remember that they serve us. That's the problem. Donald Trump has never served anyone. Donald Trump has always served Donald Trump. He's always had a leg up due to the seedy dealings of his father and his grandfather before him. A fortune based off of pimping, a fortune based off of debauchery and depravity. But that is not who we are as a nation, and it is not who we are as a people, and it is not the way that we can run our government. You see, these sorts of seedy elements are conmen. They are the P.T. Barnum of our era, thinking that a sucker is born every minute. They are attempting to control the narrative of who we are, to redefine conservatism, to play this dark and twisted game of semantics that we have warned you about since the inception of our show. But we provide you with the light of truth. We provide you with this information to empower yourself so that you can overcome these charlatans, these hucksters, so that you can see who is really opposed to you, and you can greatly intensify that empowerment by fostering this fluent working knowledge and understanding of our Constitution and thereby our fundamental and inalienable rights. You will then know who is just in it for themselves, who is doing everything in their power to prop themselves up at the great expense of you and your progeny. That is what we must do, and that is what we will do. And we will not be defeated because we are the popular sovereigns of this great republic. That is the sort of dedication that is required and expected of each and every one of us. And yes, we know that our work's cut out for us. Jim DeMint put out a piece today talking about the bizarre, lopsided coverage of the Wall Street Journal in which they attacked Ted Cruz for being an outsider, yet praised Donald J. Trump for being an outsider. It's this sort of disingenuousness, this sort of intellectual disingenuousness that must be stopped. And the only way to do that is to take the responsibility upon ourselves to read between the lines, to find the truth, and to empower ourselves with the truth. It's why my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I have oftentimes repeated on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, The Wright Flyer, that we don't want you to take our words at face value. We want you to dig into this yourself. We want you to look for the truth yourself, because in so doing, you then empower yourselves to overcome any and all obstacles and adversity that is placed within your path. And make no mistake about it, folks, this is exactly what the Fabian socialists don't want you to do. It's why they seek to control the internet. It's why they seek to impose the so-called fairness doctrine again on the radio. Why? Because their own ideology is untenable and would be boldly rejected by the body politique of the United States. Do not think that you are a minority. Do not think that you are a outsider when it comes to the values of this nation, because you are not. I heard on Rush Limbaugh's program yesterday, and it was very difficult to listen to him as he's become a shill for Trump. He basically has been this entire election cycle, but one of his callers said, I'm sick and tired of all of this, that even though we've seen the expansion of the conservative movement, we're seeing that the nation continues on its downward spiral to the left. Rush tried to say that this was due to the narrative of it not being fully adhered to by the punditry or by the commensurate, and that the party didn't really believe it. He's only partially right. You see, he is contributing to the problem, backing Donald Trump, and he's already made a prediction that Trump will defeat Hillary Clinton by a landslide. But of course, we should take such predictions with a grain of salt, because in 2012 he predicted that Mitt Romney would defeat Barack Hussein Obama by a landslide, and it didn't occur. It didn't happen. That's not the way that reality and truth played out. Before that, in 2008, he predicted that John McCain would defeat Barack Hussein Obama by a landslide. That did not occur. But he also needs to take responsibility for helping Barack Hussein Obama rise in political favor, affluence, and power, because his little game of Operation Chaos, where he told Republican voters to cross over in open primaries during the 2008 primary season to vote for Barack Hussein Obama because he concluded that he was the least electable candidate, gave us Obama, gave us these disastrous 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime. That is the same game that the Democrats turned around on us in this 2016 presidential election cycle. That is the same type of abandonment they have shown to the conservative principles in this cycle. Of course, they weren't conservative. They were doing this to help Hillary or Bernie Sanders or whoever became their nominee. That is the danger that we face when we play with fire like that. And of course, when the commensurate doesn't want to accept responsibility for their own actions, that's what happens. Of course, we see again that bizarre aspect of this 2016 election cycle is that we are trying to move away from holding people accountable. We're trying to move away from holding people responsible for their actions. The followers of Trump and those who are calling for a tyranny of false unity expect us to simply forgive Trump for his outlandish mudslinging, his unacceptable ad hominem attacks against upstanding citizens like Ted Cruz and anyone who disagreed with him as being just his odd statements, and that odd statements or foolish statements shouldn't disqualify him. But here's the problem. His odd statements will be used against him. It will be utilized as a weapon in the arsenal of deceit by the left. And when the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, who promoted him all throughout the primary season, turn their back on him, as they've already started to, believe me, they will dedicate such attention to him that he will falter and fall. Why was he doing poorly in places like Wisconsin and Utah? Because of a concerted, slowly turning narrative against him. But also, and more importantly, because people began to look into him themselves. Nevertheless, his diabolical forces marched in lockstep. Now, one of the lies and deception and part of the bizarre aspects of this cycle that's going through is they're saying in Indiana that the people, coalesced behind him to reject Ted Cruz. No, Indiana was once again an open primary. So we don't know that to be the case. Trump always performed better in open primaries where the Democrats could cross over and support him. It wasn't the Republicans who supported him because, as I've already stated, 58% of Republicans voted against him thus far. That's not a majority that he's earned. In fact, that's a majority that stands against him. And if you cannot win over a majority of your base, which, believe me, he's not going to be able to, then you are not going to be able to win in the election. This is why they always turn to us as their favorite scapegoats. This is why the bizarre aspect of the so-called conservative movement plays out the way it does in every election cycle where we're given untenable candidates. It's because they view us as their favorite scapegoat. They want to blame us for their shortcomings. But this cannot be laid at us. And this cannot be laid at our feet. We did not support Trump. We said we never would. We're standing up to those principles because we believe that the Constitution and our fundamental and inalienable rights are so important that we cannot abandon them, that we cannot turn our back on them. But that is what the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media would have us do. That is what they want us to do. They want us to turn our backs on our deeply held, heartfelt convictions and principles. I'm sorry. We're not going to do that. because we realize that it is the principles that matter, not the candidate and not the political party. It is the Constitution that matters, as I said in yesterday's Solo Flight Special. Well, that is the message. That is the truth. We must reject the bizarre aspects that have dominated this election cycle and show that they are unacceptable. Because when we show in solidarity and unity and with great force that that is untenable and unacceptable, it means that either the political powers that be adapt or they go extinct. And believe me, that Donald J. Trump is a part of that. Donald J. Trump is not the outsider that he claims to be. Yet this is what we have been warning you about for 10 months straight. Now that they have foisted this upon us, we say that we must rally around the Constitution, and that means rallying against not only Hillary Clinton, but also the presumptive nominee of the gutless opposition party. Because neither one of them stands up for the Constitution. Neither one of them advocates the same principles and convictions that we hold, and therefore they are diametrically opposed to the supreme law of the land. So long as we realize that, and so long as we stand up for these principles, they will never be able to win, and they will never be able to defeat us. But we must believe that we have the power within ourselves, in our capacity as popular sovereigns, to overcome these great obstacles and adversity. That is what our founding fathers had to do, and we must be as dedicated as they were to the cause of independence and liberty. That is what each and every one of us is called upon to do. And that is the message that we provide and purvey to you here at Radio Aviation Excellence, The Wright Flyer. We will never abandon that. And we hope that you join us in continuing to stand up for everything that we believe in, because our nation needs it. Our nation needs us now more than ever, and that is why now more than ever we are dedicated to the survival of the principles of liberty, justice, and a true sense of equality, just as our founding fathers were, just as our entire constitutionally endowed representative republic is all about that. If we are a nation of laws and not of men, we support the law and not the men. You see, the men are there to support the law, and if they don't support it, then they don't earn our support. And with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Give any and all of your bizarre trash to her so that we can clear out the bizarreness that has occurred in this 2016 election. As always, ladies and gentlemen, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. I also invite you to leave any questions, comments, or concerns you might have either here on our YouTube page or on our Facebook page or our Google Plus page, and I invite you on top of this to follow us at Twitter with the Twitter handle @RadioAviationEX. One more time, folks, @RadioAviationEX, and there you will find the departure board, which lists my personal Twitter account, the personal Twitter account of my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, our Blogspot page, and our Cafe Press account, where you can find a bunch of not-so-bizarre trinkets and goodies, such as apparel, drinking glasses with our logo on it, and the first class passenger logo on it. Show your support for us so that we can continue to fight the bizarre nature of those who would force us into tyranny and despotism. Thank you again, folks. We will see you next time. Do take care.